Are you ready for the 10 most terrifying prophecies from the book of Revelation? What you're about to discover isn't just a distant vision of the future, but a series of events that, according to Scripture, could change the destiny of humanity. These events are described as cataclysmic and inevitable, and many believe their signs are already around us. But do you truly understand the impact and depth of these revelations? Keep watching now to discover each of these prophecies and what they mean for the future of Earth and for your own destiny. You'll know exactly what each of these prophecies implies and how they connect with the events we're already witnessing. Now is the time to prepare and understand what may be coming. Don't miss the opportunity to obtain this crucial information that could change how you see the world around you. Their mysterious and symbolic messages have been the subject of countless interpretations, both by theological scholars and by those curious and enthusiastic about the end times. What makes these prophecies so impactful is their ability to provoke reflection on the destiny of humanity, especially in times of crisis and uncertainty. Many people, when confronted with apocalyptic content, tend to ignore or underestimate the depth of these messages, believing that they are distant from reality or that they are merely allegories with no connection to the current world. However, what the book of Revelation presents to us are warnings that, when analyzed properly, can bring valuable insights into the present and the future. For example, descriptions of natural catastrophes, wars, and destruction are often seen as predictions of specific events, when in fact they may be symbolic representations of spiritual and moral conflicts that transcend time. This doesn't mean that the prophecies should be dismissed as irrelevant. On the contrary, they can help us better understand the challenges we face today, offering a broader perspective on the forces that shape the world we live in. These horsemen represent not only physical calamities, but also the spiritual consequences of a humanity that has turned away from divine principles. Throughout history, these figures have been associated with moments of great suffering, such as world wars, pandemics, and economic crises, which affect both the body and soul of people. The message here is clear. When humanity deviates from its morality and justice, the consequences can be devastating, both physically and spiritually. However, what many fail to realize is that this prophecy is not just about divine punishment, but also about an opportunity for redemption. Revelation reminds us that, despite tribulations, there is always the possibility of repentance and salvation, provided humanity is willing to correct its mistakes and seek the path of righteousness. Many theories have emerged over the centuries, attempting to identify what or who this beast represents. Some believe it is a tyrannical ruler, while others see it as a representation of the forces of evil that operate in the world. The number 666, in turn, has been interpreted as a code to identify this evil figure or system. What is important to note here is that this prophecy warns of the constant presence of evil and corruption in the world, and the need for spiritual vigilance so as not to succumb to these influences. Historically, Babylon was a symbol of oppression and tyranny, and its fall, as described in Revelation, is seen as a cataclysmic event that will mark the end of an era of injustice. However, the fall of Babylon also carries a message of hope, the triumph of good over evil and the restoration of divine justice. Each seal and each trumpet announces a new disaster, such as earthquakes, plagues, and the destruction of a third of life on earth. These events are often interpreted as signs that the end is near, but they can also be seen as warnings about the dangers of continuing on a path of destruction and sin. The underlying message is that humanity still has a chance to change its destiny, but time is running out. Many interpret this battle as a literal conflict, but it can also be seen as a metaphor for the internal struggle that each human being faces between good and evil. The victory of good in Armageddon symbolizes the promise that, despite difficulties and tribulations, evil will be defeated in the end. After all the calamities and judgments, redeemed humanity will be rewarded with a new beginning in a perfect city where there will be no more pain, suffering, or death. This vision of a restored paradise offers a message of hope for those who persevere and maintain their faith, even in the face of adversity. It reminds us that although evil and suffering are part of the human experience, there is always the possibility of redemption and renewal. The challenge lies in correctly interpreting these messages and applying them to our lives in a way that helps us grow spiritually and contribute to a more just and compassionate world. The prophecies it contains are not only predictions of future disasters, but also reflections on the dilemmas and challenges that humanity has faced since the beginning of time. They remind us that, regardless of the circumstances, there is always a choice to be made, to follow the path of destruction or to seek redemption and salvation. By considering the 10 most terrifying prophecies of Revelation, we are challenged to look within ourselves and question our actions, our motivations, and our commitment to good. Keep watching to stay informed and updated. To better understand these prophecies, it is essential to first understand some fundamental concepts so that we can decipher what these messages may mean, both in historical and spiritual contexts. Revelation is rich in symbolic imagery, such as beasts, seals, trumpets, and bowls, each representing different aspects of the destruction and judgment that would come upon the earth. These symbolic images, however, are not easy to interpret, as they mix elements of spiritual, political, and social nature. One of the first prophecies that draws attention is the opening of the 7 seals. The breaking of each seal represents a series of catastrophic events culminating in the end times. The first seal reveals the white horse, which many interpret as a symbol of conquest or false peace. The second seal brings the red horse, symbolizing war, something that has always been a constant throughout human history, but which in the apocalypse takes on global proportions. From the third seal, we see the black horse, which represents famine, a natural consequence of wars and destruction. The fourth seal reveals the pale horse, which symbolizes death, bringing with it the power to kill with sword, famine, pestilence, and the beasts of the earth. These images of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are powerful because they address universal and timeless themes. War, famine, and death are realities that from ancient times to the present day affect humanity. However, in the apocalyptic context, these calamities are not isolated events, but part of a larger plan, a sequence of disasters that intensify as the end approaches. What makes these prophecies so terrifying is precisely the idea that these events are not merely natural consequences of human actions, but divine punishments intended to bring judgment upon the earth. Many scholars believe that this beast represents a political power or an empire that directly opposes God and his people. The beast is worshipped by those who reject God, and its number, 666, has been the subject of countless interpretations over the centuries. Some believe that this number is related to tyrannical rulers, while others see in it a broader symbol of the evil and corruption that dominate the world. The second beast, which arises from the earth, is seen as a false prophet who performs miracles and deceives people into worshipping the first beast. This second beast is responsible for implanting the famous mark of the beast on the forehead or right hand of all who follow it. Those who do not possess this mark cannot buy or sell, suggesting a system of total control over the economy and people's lives. This prophecy has been interpreted in various ways, with some modern theorists associating it with mass surveillance systems, digital control, and even emerging technologies, such as microchips. The second trumpet causes a burning mountain to be thrown into the sea, turning a third of the waters into blood and killing a third of the marine creatures. The third trumpet causes a star called wormwood to fall from the sky, poisoning the drinking water and causing the death of many people. The fourth trumpet darkens a third of the sun, moon, and stars, plunging the world into partial darkness. These trumpets follow a sequence of destruction that seems to affect all aspects of life on Earth: the environment, the economy, health, and even the sunlight. Each disaster seems to be worse than the previous one, creating a sense of growing despair and chaos. However, the apocalypse makes it clear that these events are not random, but are part of a divine plan to bring final judgment. The purpose of these calamities is to cause people to repent of their sins and return to God. Although in many cases, the prophecies indicate that humanity refuses to change its ways, hardening its hearts even more. He is supported by the beast and the false prophet, and together they form a profane trinity that imitates the Holy Trinity. This figure of the Antichrist has been interpreted in various ways throughout history, with some believing it to be a political leader, while others see in it a symbolic representation of the evil that permeates the world. These bowls contain divine wrath, which is poured out upon the earth in the form of plagues and disasters. The first bowl brings painful sores upon those who have the mark of the beast. The second bowl turns the sea into blood, killing all living things in it. The third bowl does the same with the rivers and springs of water. The fourth bowl causes the sun to scorch people with great heat, while the fifth plunges the throne of the beast into darkness. The sixth bowl dries up the Euphrates River, preparing the way for the final battle. And the seventh bowl brings a devastating earthquake that destroys cities and mountains, followed by a rain of giant hailstones. This final battle represents the ultimate confrontation between the power of God and the forces of evil, and ends with the victory of Christ and the establishment of a new heaven and a new earth. However, before this victory, the earth goes through a period of great tribulation, where suffering and destruction reach unprecedented levels. The horsemen, trumpets, and beasts are representations of forces that act in the spiritual and physical world. For example, the white horse may symbolize leaders who promise peace, but who, in fact, bring destruction. Similarly, the beast may represent government systems or powers that oppose divine principles, while the mark of the beast may be seen as an acceptance of values that contradict the Christian faith. Others believe that the prophecies of the apocalypse are timeless and apply to any era in which evil seems to dominate the world. In this sense, the apocalypse serves as a constant warning that, regardless of the circumstances, good will prevail in the end. The key to understanding the apocalypse is to recognize that it is not just a book of destruction, but also a book of hope. Despite all the calamities described, the apocalypse ends with the promise of a new beginning, where there will be no more pain, suffering, or death. The book challenges us to look beyond immediate circumstances and to trust in the divine plan, knowing that, in the end, good will triumph over evil. The book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, has been a source of fascination and fear for centuries, not only for its symbolic imagery and apocalyptic visions, but also for the prophecies it contains. Over the centuries, scholars, theologians, and experts have studied these prophecies, trying to understand the meaning behind their messages and warnings. The final chapter of the Bible is full of enigmatic passages that have been interpreted in various ways over time. But among all the prophecies, there are some that stand out for their gravity, being seen as the most terrifying. In this text, we will explore the 10 most frightening prophecies of the book of Revelation, bringing studies and interpretations from experts, as well as real-world examples that help to understand how these texts impact people's perception to this day. These seals are interpreted as events that precede the end times. The first seal brings the rider of the white horse, who many theologians believe represents the Antichrist. The second seal brings the rider of the red horse, symbolizing war. The third, a black horse, is associated with famine, while the fourth horse, pale, represents death. The opening of these seals is seen as a series of disasters unfolding in a crescendo of destruction. Dr. Greg Keener, one of the leading New Testament scholars, points out that this sequence of events can be interpreted as a metaphor for the social and political collapse that worsens in times of crisis. This collapse, according to Keener, can be observed at various points in history, such as during major wars and pandemics, where world order seems on the brink of chaos. Babylon, which in the biblical context represents a rich and powerful city, is described as a symbol of corruption and moral decay. The fall of Babylon is seen as a divine judgment on lust and oppression. Historians and biblical scholars, such as Professor Richard Bauckham, suggest that the Babylon of Revelation may have been inspired by first-century Rome, a vast and decadent empire. However, Bauckham also suggests that this prophecy can be applied to any great power that strays from moral and ethical principles, accumulating wealth at the expense of justice and equality. A modern example that is often related to this prophecy is the 2008 global financial crisis, where the unbridled greed of the financial markets led to the collapse of entire economies, affecting millions of people around the world. Many see this passage as a warning about totalitarian control and the loss of individual freedom. Theologian David Jeremiah, in his book, The Book of Signs, argues that this prophecy may be a metaphor for authoritarian regimes that control all aspects of their citizens' lives. He mentions as modern examples China and North Korea, where the government exerts strict control over the economic and social freedoms of its citizens, monitoring their activities and restricting their access to essential resources. The first 4 trumpets affect nature, destroying vegetation, seas, rivers, and even the sun. The last 3 trumpets bring direct torments upon humanity, such as locusts that attack people and a devastating war that kills 1/3 of the world's population. Professor Adela Yarbrough-Collins, an expert in apocalyptic literature, believes that these trumpets can be seen as a warning about the impact of human actions on the environment. Collins points to modern ecological disasters, such as global warming, pollution, and the destruction of ecosystems, as examples of how humanity is already experiencing the consequences of its lack of care for the planet. Many scholars, such as theologian John Walvoord, see Armageddon as a metaphor for the spiritual struggle that takes place in the heart of every human being, a battle between the desire to do good and the temptations of evil. However, others, such as historian Paul Boyer, argue that this prophecy has been used throughout history to justify wars and conflicts, with religious and political leaders claiming that they are fighting in God's name against the forces of evil. Over the centuries, these horsemen have been interpreted as symbols of great calamities that affect humanity. A real-world example that is often related to this prophecy is the Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century, killing millions of people. Some scholars believe that the Black Death was a manifestation of the plagues described in the Apocalypse, a form of divine punishment for the sins of humanity. Many scholars, such as theologian Grant Osborne, believe that this prophecy may be a reference to the Roman Empire, which dominated the world at the time the Apocalypse was written. However, Osborne also suggests that this prophecy can be applied to any great power that becomes corrupt and oppressive. Each plague brings a form of destruction, such as painful sores, seas turned into blood, contaminated rivers, and unbearable heat that scorches people. Theology professor N.T. Wright argues that these plagues can be seen as a warning about the consequences of human actions, especially with regard to environmental destruction and the unbridled exploitation of natural resources. This is the final destination of the wicked, where they will be cast to suffer eternal torments. Many theologians interpret this passage as a warning about the reality of hell and the importance of living a righteous life. However, others, such as theologian C.S., Lewis argue that the lake of fire may be a metaphor for eternal separation from God, a state of existence where the soul is completely disconnected from the source of all good and love. Finally, the 10th prophecy that stands out is that of the New Jerusalem, described in chapters 21 and 22. While this prophecy is seen as a promise of hope and redemption, it also carries a warning about who will be excluded from this new kingdom. Only those who have lived according to God's commandments will be admitted to the New Jerusalem, while the wicked will be left out. Theologian Leon Morris argues that this prophecy is a reminder that final judgment is inevitable and that each person must be prepared to face the consequences of their actions. They offer severe warnings about the end times and final judgment, but also bring a message of hope for those who follow God's teachings. The study of these prophecies invites us to reflect on the current state of the world and how our actions may be contributing to the fulfillment of these apocalyptic visions. Many of these prophecies are described symbolically and represent catastrophic events that, according to Christian tradition, will occur at the end of times. In this video, we will explore the 10 most terrifying prophecies of the apocalypse, those that capture the imagination and cause fear in those who read them. Let's begin our journey through the most frightening and impactful events that this sacred book describes. When the Lamb, representing Jesus Christ, begins to open the seals of the book that is in God's hands, a series of calamities is unleashed. The first seal reveals the rider on the white horse, symbolizing conquest and war. The second seal brings the rider on the red horse, representing war and widespread violence. The third seal reveals the rider on the black horse, symbolizing famine, and the fourth seal brings the rider on the pale horse, associated with death and mass destruction. These four horsemen are one of the most famous images of the apocalypse and represent a sequence of terrible events that will occur on earth. The city, which represents earthly power and rampant materialism, will be completely devastated in a single day, and the kings and merchants of the earth will lament its destruction, as it was a source of wealth and prosperity for them. The message here is clear: all earthly power that opposes God will be destroyed at the end of times. This is one of the most iconic events of the apocalypse, in which the forces of good and evil confront each other in a final battle. Armageddon symbolizes the last confrontation between Christ and the forces of evil, led by the Antichrist and his followers. This battle is described as devastating, with blood flowing like a river and great destruction. It's a powerful image of the final confrontation between good and evil, which will culminate in the victory of Christ and the establishment of a new heaven and a new earth. The mark of the beast, a symbol that will be imposed on everyone, will be necessary to buy or sell, and those who do not receive it will be persecuted and possibly killed. This prophecy is one of the most debated and has been the subject of countless interpretations throughout history. The first trumpet brings fire mixed with blood, which burns a third of the trees and all the green grass. The second trumpet causes something like a great burning mountain to be thrown into the sea, turning a third of the waters into blood and killing much of the marine life. The third trumpet causes a burning star called wormwood to fall on the rivers and springs of water, poisoning a third of the drinking water. These trumpets are seen as warnings that God's judgment is near. The intensity of these plagues increases as the end approaches, culminating in the great earthquake that destroys the cities of the nations and the fall of Babylon. The Antichrist is described as a charismatic leader who will unite the nations under his rule, but his true intention is destruction and deception. He opposes Christ and tries to lead as many people as possible to perdition. The plagues, wars, and natural disasters described in the apocalypse are only a part of what will happen during this time. The tribulation is seen as a final test of the faith of Christians, who will have to choose between following God or succumbing to the temptations and threats of the Antichrist. Those whose names are not written in the book of life will be cast into the lake of fire, which symbolizes the second death and eternal punishment. This is the moment when divine justice will be fully realized and each person will be judged according to their works. The New Jerusalem will descend from heaven, and God will dwell with his people forever. This is the glorious outcome of the apocalypse, in which evil is defeated forever and eternal peace is established. Therefore, it is important to be attentive to the signs and to live according to divine teachings.